Welcome to Easy Sleep, where calm begins and your journey to restful sleep starts now. Before the story starts, we're going to complete a quick exercise. Take a deep breath in through your nose and exhale slowly. Do it again. Inhale and release. Now bring to mind 3 things you're grateful for right now. With each breath, feel that gratitude settle deeper in your chest. You are safe. You are supported. You are enough. Now shift your focus to something you want to create. A goal, a lifestyle, a feeling. Pick one thing. Be specific. Say it clearly in your mind, or whisper it. I am calling in. I am ready to receive it. Repeat it to yourself, with conviction, with belief. Feel the truth of it as if it's already yours. Because if you can imagine it, you can move toward it. Now picture yourself already living it. Where are you? What do you see around you? Who's with you? What sounds, smells, colours? See the version of you who already has this life. How do you walk? Speak? Wake up in the morning. Breathe into that image. Let it become more vivid, more real. You are not chasing this. You're aligning with it, matching its frequency. You are stepping into that version of yourself now. Bring your attention back to your breath. Inhale. Exhale. Feel your body. Wiggle your fingers and toes. Keep the vision. Keep the gratitude. Now repeat after me. I'm going to have the best night's sleep ever. My body's relaxed and ready for the deepest sleep. I'm going to wake up so refreshed.
Jake Wallace stared at it like it had personally insulted him. He hadn't even dropped it into the toaster yet, and somehow it was blackened around the edges like a little edible funeral. Fantastic, he muttered. Breakfast charred to hell, just how Mum never made it. He tossed it into the sink, where it slid down and stuck to the side of an old coffee mug with a chipped lip, and a fading photo of a woman he didn't talk to anymore. The mug had outlasted the relationship like most things in his apartment. Kafka, his grey tabby cat, leapt onto the kitchen counter with the chaotic energy of a creature who paid no rent. With one swift paw, he knocked a paper towel roll to the floor, then nudged an empty glass to its doom. It shattered on the linoleum like punctuation. Jake didn't flinch. I feed you. I pet you. I let you sleep on my spine like a 12-pound regret. And this is the thanks I get. Kafka blinked slowly, then began licking his paw with the blank detachment of someone who would watch you fall down a flight of stairs and not move an inch. Jake poured himself a cup of coffee from a machine that wheezed like it resented its own existence. The brew was lukewarm and bitter, not in a robust, satisfying way, but in a tired, unresolved feelings kind of way. He sipped it anyway. Outside, Fairhaven looked like it always did in midwinter. Tired, grey, a little crusted around the edges. Snow clung to the corners of sidewalks like forgotten crumbs. People moved through the streets with that unique urban shuffle, half brisk, half defeated. His phone buzzed. Chris Morn, 9 a.m. meeting. Don't bail. Also, you still owe me lunch. Don't pretend you don't remember. Jake tossed the phone onto the couch and dressed without much care. Button-down shirt that didn't quite match the pants. Coat that had seen better days. It all felt performative, like a costume for a role he no longer believed in. The walk to the office took 11 minutes. It always did. No matter how slowly he moved. Same rows of recycling bins out front of the bodega, Same guy yelling into his phone outside the laundromat. Same pigeon posted on the parking meter like it was overseeing construction. He passed Cafe Aurora, a cosy little brick front with windows fogged from the heaters inside. A handwritten sign was taped to the door. Try the winter latte. Cardamom plus bitter orange equals yes, please. He pushed the door open and was hit with a warm wall of espresso and vanilla and cinnamon. It smelled like competence, like somewhere better people might go. "Morning, Jake," Sophie said from behind the counter without looking up. She always said his name like it was a test, a riddle, like she was curious what he might do with it today. Jake approached the counter and leaned casually. "You ever think this place is weirdly cheerful for 7 in the morning?" Sophie smirked. "You ever think you're weirdly uncheerful for 7 in the morning?" He opened his mouth to fire back, then just shrugged. She slid him as usual without asking. He accepted it with a half nod and retreated to his usual table, back corner, under the watercolour fox on a bicycle. The fox looked smug. Of course it did. He sipped his coffee and checked the time. 8:47. Time to pretend to care. The Fairhaven Daily News office was less a newsroom and more a hospice for slowly dying journalism. Beige walls, flickering overhead lights, a printer in the basement that made a sound like regret every time it started. Jake slid into a hard plastic chair in the conference room just as the morning meeting began. "We need something local for the front page," barked Teresa, their managing editor. "And I swear to God, if someone pitches another dog rescue story, I will set this place on fire." A few people laughed. Not Jake. Chris leaned in beside him and whispered, "You look like someone replaced your soul with expired hummus." Jake didn't turn. "You're just jealous of my editorial despair." "Lunch later?" Chris asked. "Depends. Are you going to tell me again how Fairhaven's secretly charming?" Chris shrugged. "Hey man, maybe it's not Fairhaven. Maybe it's you." They ended up at a ramen place Jake tolerated because Chris liked the waitress. Jake picked at his bowl while Chris slurped happily. "Every day's the same," Jake muttered. "Same blocks, same job, same people pretending this isn't just slow death in business casual." "You ever think it's not the world that's stuck?" Chris said between bites. "Maybe it's you." Jake glared at him. "Is this where you quote a podcast and tell me to journal?" Chris held up his hands. "Just saying, you walk around like life owes you a fireworks show." Jake looked out the window across the street to Cafe Aurora. Through the glass, he saw Sophie laughing at something a customer said. Her smile hit sideways, tilted and natural, like she wasn't trying. Chris followed his gaze. "You ever think about asking her out?" Jake blinked. "Who?" Chris just grinned. "You look at her like a cat watching a birdhouse." Jake didn't respond. He returned to the cafe that afternoon, pacing around the block twice before convincing himself he wasn't nervous. Sophie looked up from behind the counter as he entered. "Back already?" "The coffee at the office tastes like a sad divorce," he replied. She smiled, small and not quite open. "Regret forward, with a bitter finish?" "Exactly." He noticed her earrings. "Those are new, right?" She touched one. "Had them for years." "Oh," he said, "they look murder mystery chic." That's either a compliment or a cry for help. Maybe both. They made eye contact for a beat too long. She broke it. "Your usual?" He hesitated. "Yeah, but maybe oat milk today." She raised an eyebrow. "Living dangerously." He grinned. "I contain multitudes." Sophie prepped the drink as Jake watched the cafe breathe. Everyone seemed to belong here but him. He nodded toward her book on the counter. "What are you reading?" "The Idiot. Elif Batuman." Jake laughed. "A book about someone who thinks a lot but doesn't know how to live." "Wow." Autobiographical. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "You want this to go?" He didn't answer right away. "You ever feel stuck here?" She paused. "You always act like you're on your way to something better." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means you don't stay long enough to find out what's actually good." Then she turned to the next customer. Jake left with a coffee that suddenly tasted like nothing. The sky was bruised purple by the time he passed the boarded-up flower shop on 6th and Monroe. A woman sat outside it, cross-legged on a flattened cardboard box, scarf wound dramatically around her head. Her coat was part thrift store, part prophecy. In front of her sat a sign, "Tomorrow isn't guaranteed, but today is repeatable." Jake frowned. "You're kidding me," he muttered. The woman looked up. "Evening, Jake." He froze. "Do I know you?" "You've walked by me 27 times, close enough." He squinted. "What is this? Performance art?" "Street truth," she replied. "Call me Lucy." Of course she was a Lucy. She gestured to the sign. "The problem isn't the loop, it's the wall." "I have no idea what that means." "You don't need to. Yet." She grinned. "Gratitude's the key, Jake. You've already got the door." He blinked at her. She just looked up at the sky like it was telling a joke only she understood. Jake left without another word. His apartment welcomed him with cold light and stale silence. He microwaved orange chicken, didn't finish it, watched part of a detective show where no one blinked. His phone lit up with a photo memory. Him and Rebecca. Laughing on a beach. A different version of himself in a timeline that didn't exist anymore. He let the screen go dark. Kafka curled into his lap, purring like a small vibrating accusation. He thought of Sophie's words, Lucy's voice. He muttered, "Whatever," and collapsed into bed fully clothed. The alarm buzzed. Jake sat up fast. Same ceiling, same crack, same cold. He walked into the kitchen. Bagel, burned, Kafka, knocked over the trash. Phone, missed call, same time. Outside, same truck, same guy yelling on the corner, same snow clinging to curbs. Knock on the door, Chris's voice. "You better not still be in bed. Meeting's in 20. Jake opened the door. Chris stood there, coffee thermos in hand. "You okay?" he asked. Jake stared at him. "I think this is yesterday." The bagel burned again. Jake watched it emerge from the toaster like a magician's sad trick. Blackened edges, a smell like despair at a diner. Kafka was already perched on the counter, tail flicking. The cat knocked over the trash with the same elegance, the same noise, the same expressionless face as the morning before. Outside, the same garbage truck growled down the street. Same orange cab, same dented left door. Jake didn't blink. He poured his coffee, lukewarm, just like last time. "Okay," he said softly. "Sure, fine." He stood still for a moment, just long enough to feel the air hold around him. Then he threw the mug into the sink, grabbed his coat, and walked out the door with something that felt suspiciously like purpose. The office looked exactly as it had yesterday, because of course it was yesterday. Teresa's voice was already echoing down the hallway. No puff pieces, no pancake festivals, no more goddamn rescue ferrets. Jake pushed open the conference room door mid-sentence. "Pancakes are deeply political," he announced. Heads turned. Chris blinked. Teresa looked ready to throw a stapler. Jake dropped into a chair, slouched like he'd been rehearsing it for weeks. "You okay?" Chris mouthed. Jake winked. He waited until Teresa started talking again, about deadlines, about funding, about print numbers dropping like flies, then stood up, stretched dramatically and said, "You know what? I quit." The room froze. Teresa looked up from her notes. "What?" "Or maybe I don't," Jake said, smiling. "Maybe I'm just having a vivid hallucination in which all of you are projections of my own mediocrity." No one laughed. Jake walked out without another word. By noon, he was 3 blocks away eating a sandwich he hadn't paid for. The kid behind the counter had barely looked up. "Add that to the tab," Jake had said cheerfully, waving his hand like a magician. The kid nodded blankly. No alarms, no police, no consequences. Jake bit into the sandwich. Too much mustard. He didn't care. He felt free, or something like it. He wandered through the park, kicked a soccer ball back to a kid, and told the parents he was the ghost of a long-forgotten PE teacher. They didn't laugh. They just blinked. He walked into a pharmacy, dumped 3 packs of gum into his coat pocket, then spent 10 minutes telling a woman in the greeting card aisle that no one actually likes birthday cards with dogs on them. The woman stared like he was a local cryptid. By 2 p.m., Jake was back at Cafe Aurora, standing in line like a customer, heart beating faster than it should have. Sophie looked up from behind the counter, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Hey," she said, "twice in one day? You okay?" Jake didn't answer. He stepped forward, leaned across the counter and kissed her. She froze. Coffee spilled. Someone gasped. Then she slapped him. Jake barely flinched. He smiled, said, "Huh," and walked out. He woke up the next morning with a red imprint on his cheek and the sound of the same radio announcer in his ear. Bagel, burned, Kafka, trash, garbage truck, phone buzz, knock at the door. "Meeting in 20, Chris called. Jake laughed until he doubled over on the kitchen floor. Over the next few loops, the chaos got louder. He walked into a church and did an impromptu monologue about existential dread during a baptism. He hijacked the mic at a city council meeting to sing a half-remembered version of Wonderwall. He left post-it notes in co-workers' desks that just said you don't exist. It never mattered. Every day the world reset. No one remembered, nothing stuck. He began watching people like they were props in a very long, very strange rehearsal. Chris stopped being Chris. He was just the guy who always asked if Jake was okay. Sophie became a script. Jake played it different ways. Funny, serious, quiet, flirty, unhinged. Nothing changed. She always looked at him like he was unfamiliar. And maybe he was. One night, after a particularly long loop involving a stolen bicycle, a failed attempt to juggle at a farmer's market, and a highly unnecessary lie about being in the CIA, Jake sat in his living room, staring out at the street. The lights blurred in the window. Kafka sat beside him, tail curled neatly around his feet. "I don't know what I'm doing," Jake said aloud. The cat blinked. "Am I in hell?" he asked, more seriously than he wanted to admit. "Or is this just Fair Haven forever?" He didn't sleep much. The next day he walked into Cafe Aurora and didn't speak. He just watched Sophie from across the room. She was talking to an older woman about her father, something about medical bills maybe. Her voice was soft but firm, her smile small but tired, her kindness looked like effort. Jake felt something fold in his chest. She didn't know him. Not really. No matter how many times he repeated this day, none of it stayed with her. None of the little moments he thought were building towards something real. She wasn't growing closer to him. He was just walking the same loop over and over and calling it a journey. He left without finishing his coffee. That evening he found Lucy again. Same scarf, same sign, same knowing look. He stood over her, eyes dark. "Tell me what's going on." She didn't flinch. "You already know." "I'm in a loop, a glitch, something's broken, right?" She shook her head. "No, Jake, nothing's broken but you." He clenched his jaw. "Is this some kind of punishment?" "It's a pause, and you haven't learned how to press play again." Jake stepped back. "You speak in riddles. You're not helping." "I'm not here to help," she said calmly. "I'm here to witness." He stared at her. She met his gaze and added softly, "You're not stuck because of time. You're stuck because of how you see it." He woke up again. Same ceiling, same light, same breathless silence. This time he didn't move right away. He just lay there, listening to the radio, trying not to feel like it was all closing in. The fun was gone. Now it was a trap. The bagel was burned. Kafka knocked over the trash. The coffee machine hissed like it had secrets. Jake stood in the middle of the kitchen, not moving. His face was blank, but behind his eyes was calculation. Quiet, determined, methodical. Today would be different. Not because he wanted it to be real, because he was going to make it perfect. By 8 a.m., he had showered, shaved, ironed his shirt, and selected a jacket that made him look exactly 2% more competent. He memorized Chris's morning texts. He timed the garbage truck's arrival to the second. He had the cafe open in a tab on his laptop and read Sophie's staff profile on the shop's blog 3 times. She liked Turkish literature. Her dad had owned a record store. Her favourite drink was a cortado with cinnamon and a single drop of honey. Jake made notes. Then he left, exactly 4 minutes earlier than usual, just enough to seem casual, not eager. At work he was brilliant. He arrived early, brought Teresa coffee, complimented her earrings without irony. She stared at him with suspicion, but didn't throw anything. He called Chris a beacon of competence during the meeting, and made 3 well-timed jokes that landed like applause lines. Chris pulled him aside afterward, grinning. "Okay, seriously, what's going on with you? New meds? Lottery win? Secret cult?" Jake smiled. "Maybe I'm just evolving." Chris narrowed his eyes. "You're not allowed to evolve without telling me." He left for lunch precisely at 12:07 and walked into Cafe Aurora like he hadn't rehearsed every step. Sophie was at the counter, laughing with a regular. She looked over as he stepped up. "Hey," she said, "you look well adjusted." "I had a decent morning," Jake said, adding just the right mix of humility and charm. "I thought I'd celebrate with a cortado, cinnamon, and—" "1 drop of honey," she finished. "Bold choice." He smiled. "You remembered?" She nodded slowly. "I did." She turned to make the drink. Jake leaned casually on the counter. "How's your dad doing, with the new meds?" She turned slightly, her body tensing just enough for him to notice. "I don't think I mentioned that to you." Jake froze for half a second, recovered. "Right, you didn't. I just overheard you talking to someone, maybe, a while back." Sophie placed the cup in front of him with careful hands. "You ever get the feeling someone's reading ahead in your story?" Jake blinked. "I'm sorry." "You've got this look," she said, voice soft. "Like you know what everyone's about to say. Like you're waiting for a line that's already been written." He didn't answer. Sophie smiled, polite but distant. "Enjoy your cortado, Jake." He left, drink untouched. Later that day, he visited Rebecca. She lived on the other side of town in a narrow apartment filled with light and expensive throw pillows. She answered the door wearing reading glasses and a skeptical expression. "Wow," she said. "Jake Wallace. Apocalypse or midlife crisis?" He hesitated. "I was in the neighborhood." "You were never in the neighborhood when we were dating." She let him in anyway. They sat, talked. He asked how she was doing. She gave him clipped, efficient answers. He told her she deserved better back then, better communication, better consistency, someone who didn't dodge every real conversation. Rebecca folded her arms. "Okay, now I know something's wrong. I'm serious." She tilted her head. "You've been in this exact apartment once. You just walked straight to the kitchen without asking. You quoted a conversation I had last week with my boss, and you're looking at me like I'm an old movie you already watched." Jake tried to explain. He told her about the loop, the days repeating, the resets. She didn't flinch. She said, "You've always lived like that." "What?" "In a loop. You say the right things. You figure people out. You rehearse how you're supposed to be, but you never show up." He looked at her, stunned. Rebecca stood and walked to the door. "Maybe the reason your life feels like a script is because you're always performing." The next day, Jake said almost nothing to anyone. He walked through Fairhaven like a shadow, didn't speak in the morning meeting, nodded politely to Chris but offered no jokes. At the cafe, he just pointed at the menu, took his drink, sat in the corner and watched. No one noticed him, no one reached out. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was crushing. He realized he could go days, weeks in this loop without anyone actually seeing him, without being real to a single person. And maybe that was always true. That night, Jake sat on the floor in front of his bathroom mirror with a bottle of whiskey and a question he didn't know how to ask. He looked at himself, pale, tired, the shape of a person, not the substance. "What's the point?" he whispered. Kafka meowed from the hallway. Jake laughed once. "You wouldn't get it." He stared at his reflection, tried to picture what he'd say to himself if he were a friend. Nothing came. His reflection said nothing back. "I don't even know what I'm pretending to be anymore." The whiskey burned. The mirror stayed quiet. He lay down on the floor, cold tile against his cheek, and waited for the reset. Jake didn't reach for his phone that morning. He didn't make coffee, didn't toast the bagel he already knew would burn, didn't bother picking up the trash Kafka knocked over. He left the apartment with uncombed hair and no plan. No script. No clever line to deliver. No moment to optimize. No outcome to manipulate. Just the day. It was still grey outside. Fairhaven's favourite colour. Cold without sharpness. The kind of air that makes you zip your jacket out of reflex but not discomfort. The streets had already begun their daily ritual. Dog walkers gliding on autopilot. Someone in a red scarf unlocking a bike. A delivery truck inching past like it was afraid to disturb anything. Jake walked without purpose. For the first time since this began, he let himself drift. Outside the park gates, a man in a threadbare coat fed pigeons from a paper bag like he was giving communion. He whispered to them like they were old friends. Jake stopped and watched for a full 5 minutes. He passed a sidewalk chalk mural near the elementary school. It had a castle drawn in violet, with a dragon wrapped around the tower. Every time Jake had seen it before, he'd walked right past it. Now he paused. Someone had traced a tiny figure waving from the top window. The hand was only a smudge of pink dust. He watched a couple arguing on a bench. They weren't loud. She was holding a takeout container and he kept trying to touch her hand. She wiped at her eye with the back of her wrist. The tenderness between their silences was louder than anything they said. Jake kept walking. At a crosswalk he stepped aside for an elderly woman with a grocery cart, then gently helped her push it over a patch of ice. She didn't say thank you. She just patted his hand and moved on. Around 10:30, Jake walked into a coffee shop, not Cafe Aurora, not yet, and bought 2 plain black coffees. He walked 5 blocks and left one of them on a bench near a bus stop, steam curling lazily into the cold. He didn't wait to see who took it. He picked up a crumpled fast food bag from the sidewalk and dropped it into a trash can without thinking. He held a door for someone juggling 3 dry cleaning bags. He gave a tourist directions to the library without sarcasm. None of it was dramatic. None of it mattered. But somehow, it all did. Chris was already at the ramen place when Jake arrived, head buried in his phone. "You're 10 minutes early," Chris said without looking up. "Who are you and what have you done with the guy who usually shows up late and emotionally unavailable?" Jake smirked, slid into the booth. "Thought I'd try punctuality. New drug." Chris glanced at him, sensing something. "You good?" Jake didn't deflect. "Yeah," he said simply. "I think I'm okay. Not good, but okay." They ordered. The same waitress smiled, already knowing their usual. Jake watched the way she jotted it down anyway, just to look busy. "How's your mom?" Jake asked suddenly. Chris blinked. "What?" "Your mom. You said she was going in for knee surgery soon. Last week, I think." Chris leaned back, his expression changing. "Jesus, I forgot I even mentioned that. Yeah, she's doing all right, still stubborn, still refusing to use the walker like she's trying to win some kind of orthopedic triathlon." Jake chuckled. "Sounds about right." Chris studied him for a second. "You've been different lately." Jake didn't answer, just nodded. Let the silence sit. Chris smiled a little. "I like it." At Cafe Aurora, Jake waited in line behind a guy with a Bluetooth earpiece arguing with someone over zoning permits. Sophie was at the register, her hair pulled back loosely, sleeves pushed up. Her eyes looked tired in a way that makeup didn't fix. When he stepped up, she raised an eyebrow. "No cortado with oat milk and philosophical banter today." Jake shook his head. "Just plain coffee, and maybe a seat by the window. No metaphors." She paused. "You seem quieter today." Jake looked at her, and for once didn't try to be charming. "I'm just here." Her gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then she handed him the cup. "Come back tomorrow." Jake blinked. "What?" She shrugged. "We'll try being real people again." He spent the rest of the day wandering, nowhere in particular, through the bookstore, into the park again, past a closed-down comic shop with a faded coming soon banner that clearly never came. At dusk, he sat on a bench in the square as the sky drained of colour. People passed by with purpose and earbuds and coats zipped to their chins. Somewhere, a street musician played something soft on a violin. He didn't think about escaping the loop. He didn't try to win or solve anything. He just sat. And for the first time since the nightmare started, he didn't mind if the day repeated. He was for once fully in it. The bagel didn't burn this time. Jake pulled it from the toaster early, slicing it in half with surprising ease. Kafka weaved between his ankles but didn't knock anything over. The coffee brewed without complaint. He even found a clean mug. He hadn't planned any of that. He'd simply moved through the motions quietly, like someone who wasn't in a rush to be anywhere else. The radio murmured in the background, same announcer, same dull headlines. Jake didn't listen. He just stood by the window, sipping from his mug, watching the early grey lights settle on the rooftops. It was all the same, but today, it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a rhythm. He held the door for a man carrying a baby stroller up the steps of the pharmacy, helped a kid who dropped her mitten on the sidewalk, gave his seat up on the bus to a woman who looked like she hadn't sat down since 1983. No grand gestures, just presence. Fairhaven didn't change. Jake did. At Cafe Aurora, Sophie greeted him with that gentle nod she used when she wasn't quite sure how to read him. But today, he didn't push it. He just smiled, asked for her recommendation, and sat near the window while she prepared something spicy, warm, and slightly irrational. When she brought the drink over, steaming chai with a twist of orange, she lingered. "You seem lighter today," she said. "I'm tired of dragging things," he replied. She pulled out the chair across from him. "You always act like you're mid-debate with the universe, but today it's like you're just here." Jake looked at her. "I think I am." Sophie wrapped her hands around her own cup. "You ever feel like the world's holding still, and you're the only thing panicking?" "All the time." She nodded. "My dad used to say life isn't stuck, it's just patient, sometimes more patient than we are." Jake smiled softly. "Is he still around?" She hesitated, then said, "He's sick. Liver failure. Won't let me talk about it. He's one of those men who thinks silence equals strength." Jake didn't offer sympathy. He didn't try to fix it. He just said, "That's heavy." She looked at him. "Thank you for not trying to make it poetic." They sat in silence for a few beats, sipping their drinks. Before he left, she touched his hand. Brief, quiet. "Come back tomorrow," she said. "Like this version of you." He took Chris out for lunch. Not ramen. Somewhere nicer. Somewhere Chris liked. They sat in a booth near a window. The sun angled in just enough to catch dust in the air, turning it to gold. Jake didn't waste time. "I've been a crap friend." Chris looked up, chewing. Jake went on. "You've carried a lot. Stuff I never noticed. You've been patient. With me. With your mum. With this whole city. And I've spent the last few years acting like my disappointment was the only story that mattered." Chris didn't respond right away. Then, "Where is this coming from?" Jake shrugged. "I think I'm starting to realize how much I've missed. How many people I've passed by while waiting for something better." Chris swallowed slowly. "You sound like you went to therapy." "I sort of did," Jake said. "It was disguised as a psychic and a series of recurring nightmares." Chris gave a quiet laugh. Then his eyes glassed over. "You're not wrong. I have carried a lot." Jake reached across the table and covered Chris's hand with his own. "You shouldn't have to carry it alone." Chris didn't speak, just nodded, his jaw tight. It was the first time their friendship felt like it had depth instead of history. Everywhere he went, the city gave something back. A stranger helped him pick up a folder he dropped on the sidewalk. A little girl handed him a tulip made of construction paper. A woman at the bookstore recommended a novel and smiled when he bought it. It wasn't magic, it wasn't fate, it was simple. He wasn't taking any more, he was with the day. That night, he stood on his balcony, coat zipped, warm mug in hand. Fairhaven shimmered beneath him, windows lit, voices drifting through alleyways, steam rising from vents and chimneys. The wind bit his ears, but it felt clean, alive. He looked up at the sky. "Thank you," he whispered. And for the first time he didn't mean it ironically. He slept soundly. The alarm buzzed. Same station, same grey light, same breath in his chest. Jake opened his eyes slowly. Bagel, burned, Kafka, trash can, street. Identical. His hands curled into fists beneath the blanket. "No," he whispered. But the loop didn't care. It began again. The alarm buzzed. Jake didn't move. Same hum, same grey, same room. The day pressed down like a thumb on a bruise. He stayed in bed until Kafka jumped on his chest, meowed once, and left a single hair stuck to his chin. Even then, Jake didn't get up. He skipped the bagel, let the trash stay on the floor, let the coffee pot remain cold. No texts were answered, no coat was put on, no door opened until mid-afternoon, when the sun had already begun to lean westward. He walked aimlessly, didn't go to work, didn't go to Cafe Aurora, didn't go anywhere he'd be recognized. Fairhaven passed around him like a silent crowd, and Jake moved through it like fog. The buildings blurred at the edges, the streets hummed with neutral purpose. He wandered through the square, the bookstore, the river path. He said nothing, bought nothing, didn't even look up when someone bumped into his shoulder. He sat on a bench and stared at nothing until the cold began to reach his bones. The next loop he didn't leave the apartment. He fed Kafka but forgot to eat himself. He tried watching something on TV but couldn't make it past the title screen. He lay on the couch with a blanket and stared at the ceiling fan as it sat motionless above him. Then he closed his eyes, opened them, and it was morning again. 3 loops passed like that. Maybe 4. He wasn't counting. He didn't speak to Sophie. Didn't answer when Chris knocked. Didn't even flinch when Teresa left a voicemail that ended with, "Seriously, Jake, what is going on?" There was no anger, no resistance, just emptiness, and it spread. One evening, just as dusk scraped across the sky in bruised colours, Jake found himself walking without knowing why. He ended up near the old florist shop again, and there she was, Lucy, wrapped in the same scarf, seated on the same broken crate. Her sign was gone this time, just her and the thick quiet of early evening. He didn't sit beside her, didn't speak. She looked up anyway. "Burned out the fight?" she asked gently. Jake didn't answer, and she didn't seem to mind. They sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that didn't need managing. The wind pressed against his coat, and a flock of starlings dipped across the rooftops like smoke. Lucy tilted her head toward him. "Can you love something that doesn't promise you anything back?" Jake stared forward. She didn't elaborate, she didn't explain what she meant. She didn't need to, he didn't respond, but he stayed. That night he swept his apartment. He cleaned the litter box. He gave Kafka wet food instead of dry, and even lit one of those candles Rebecca had left behind when she moved out. Lavender and cedar. It made the space feel almost warm. He walked to Cafe Aurora but didn't order anything. Just stood in line, met Sophie's eyes and gave a quiet nod. She smiled softly and nodded back. Nothing else passed between them. That was enough. He walked through Fairhaven with his hands in his coat pockets, noticing again, not because he was trying to change anything, but because he wanted to see. A kid fell off his scooter and stood up laughing. A woman danced to music in her headphones while waiting for the bus. 2 dogs wrestled near the fountain, oblivious to the world around them. He picked up an empty can and tossed it in a recycling bin without thinking. He stopped on the corner where the streetlight always blinked yellow, watching it flicker with its usual nervous rhythm. Snow began to fall, not heavy, just enough to quiet the air. Jake stood there, breath clouding, face cold, and let it happen. No goals, no plan. Just a person in a city that would forget him again in the morning. He didn't care. The moment was still his. The alarm buzzed. Same tone, same volume. Jake opened his eyes, but the light was different. It wasn't the muted grey wash he'd come to expect. It was golden. Software. It cut across the far wall like a brushstroke. Warm, slow, and real. There was dust in the beam. Floating, unhurried. Kafka was still on the bed, curled at the edge, not prowling the kitchen. For the first time in weeks, months, he hadn't knocked over the trash. Jake sat up slowly. Something inside him whispered, "Don't move too fast, don't scare it away." He walked into the kitchen. The bagel popped out of the toaster perfectly golden brown. He blinked. The radiator wasn't hissing. The garbage truck didn't growl past the window. The phone didn't buzz. Everything was still, everything was new. Outside, Fairhaven looked like it always had. And yet, everything was different. The usual graffiti on the utility box was gone, painted over with a fresh mural. A red fox curled in a field of blue flowers. He'd never seen it before. A chalkboard outside the diner read, "New lunch special, lamb burgers and lemon pie." He passed a woman walking a 3-legged dog that trotted proudly down the sidewalk. A man in a bowler hat tipped it to a passing jogger. Jake stopped at the corner. The light changed before he could press the button. His heart beat harder in his chest. This wasn't yesterday. He looked up at the sky, whispering, "It's today." At Cafe Aurora, the bell above the door chimed as usual, but Sophie looked up and smiled like she was seeing him for the first time. "Hey," she said. Jake smiled back, small and open. "Hey." "Never seen you this early." He shrugged. Felt like something new. She leaned on the counter. "Want to try something new too?" He nodded. "Surprise me." She pulled down a small cup. "I'm experimenting with lemon zest and smoked honey. It's probably a terrible idea." Jake laughed. "Sounds exactly like the right kind of terrible." They stood quietly while she worked. No tension, no need to rush. She handed him the drink. Their fingers brushed. He didn't ask if she wanted to talk, or if she felt something, or if she'd ever seen him before. He just said, "Thanks." She smiled, curious. "Come back tomorrow. I'll have a better version." He nodded. "I plan to." At the office, Chris greeted him with a yawn and a wave. "How was your weekend?" Jake stopped walking. Chris glanced over. "You okay?" Jake laughed, just once. The sound caught in his throat. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." They sat in the break room for a bit, sipping coffee and talking about nothing in particular. Sports, movies, the annoying noise the copier was making. Chris mentioned his mum was visiting next week. Jake made a note to remember that. Everything was moving again. Not just around him, through him. He walked through Fairhaven with the eyes of someone who'd just woken up from a long, strange dream. The crosswalks changed at new intervals. Kids chased pigeons in the park. A group of teens skateboarded past, laughing at something Jake couldn't hear. Nothing remarkable happened. It was all remarkable. That evening he stood on his balcony as the sky bruised into night. The lights of Fairhaven sparkled, messy and warm, imperfect and alive. In the distance someone strummed a guitar. A dog barked once. A woman laughed too loudly. Jake leaned on the railing and breathed in the cold. This wasn't a reward. It wasn't a prize. It was just the world as it always had been, finally allowed to continue because he'd stopped trying to force it. Tomorrow wasn't a mystery. It was just another chance, and he was ready.